scary stories. Up until junior year of high school, I flew mostly under the social radar and stuck to my status as a nerd girl. But when I was 15, I joined varsity cheer. My school's cheerleaders weren't popular by definition, but everyone kind of knew who we were because we were on the announcements, performed at pep rallies, and generally engaged with the students a lot. I made lots of friends that year, and some of them happened to be the cool kids. For a while, I thought this was my long-awaited karma payoff for the years of bullying I'd suffered at their hands. I even developed a crush on one of them, a crush which the junior cheer captain herself volunteered to help me pursue. Homecoming is a big deal where I'm from, and I began to fantasize about my crush asking me to go with him. I had heard rumors he was planning a dramatic proposal, and as homecoming season approached, I became more and more sure I would be his date. The junior cheer captain, who was close with him, kept dropping hints that I was right. One day at practice, she asked me what my favorite candy was, and I knew it would be so my crush would know what to give me. You can imagine my surprise when, after an exhausting theater rehearsal, I walked into the parking lot and was confronted by a guy I'd hardly spoken to, asking me to be his date. My theater friends all applauded, assuming I was overjoyed. I saw both my parents in the parking lot recording the whole surprise. But, most importantly, the cool kids I'd recently befriended were standing right there behind him, egging him on. I didn't understand why, because he wasn't popular at all. In fact, he was known to be kind of creepy. The junior cheer captain was laughing, encouraging him to give me the box of my favorite candy he was holding. She had definitely orchestrated the whole thing. I didn't know the guy, but I didn't want to humiliate him in front of all the coolest kids in school, so I faked a smile and rolled with it. I promised myself I'd deny him later in private, so he wouldn't be embarrassed. Afterwards, when my parents excitedly asked me how I felt about the ordeal, I explained how uncomfortable it made me. I said that I got strong, creepy vibes from the guy that didn't fly with my parents. My mother accused me of having expectations too high, and my father demanded to know if I was secretly a lesbian. To make his case stronger, I'd just become best friends with the only openly gay girl our school had ever seen. Long story short, I knew that if I shut down my date, I had effectively declared war on my parents. However, I played my dad's protective instinct against him and persuaded him to let me friend zone my date. After all, he knows how high school boys think, right? I texted my date that night, explained that I only saw us as friends, but would still be happy to go to homecoming with him. He was very polite about it, although I could tell he was interested in me romantically. It seemed we'd reached a deal until the next day at school, when one of my cheerleader friends referred to my date as my boyfriend. I corrected her and told her we are just going to homecoming as friends. She seemed rather confused and told me my date was telling everyone who could listen that I was his girlfriend. A few more of my friends approached me with similar comments, and I confronted my date about them. He denied all involvement and suggested it was just a rumor. I reminded him that we were just friends and I had zero romantic interest in him. He said he understood. I got a call from the junior cheer captain. She pretended to be sweet. But I was still annoyed that she had led me to believe my crush would ask me to homecoming. She began her attempt to persuade me that I was wrong to friend zone my date. She said that she had spent many afternoons planning his proposal with him, and she knew he was kind of creepy from afar, but he was sweet and caring underneath all of that. I said if he was such a catch, she should date him. Annoyed, she dropped the sweet act. She told me that I had to date him because he liked me so much, and he'd gone to so much trouble to ask me to homecoming. I had to give him a chance because he had gone out on a limb for me. I told her she was wrong, and I didn't have to do anything. I didn't want to do it. And I owe him nothing. I ended up hanging up on her soon after that, but that was just the beginning. Starting the next Monday, he would corner me in the hallway and give me a rose he held in his teeth. He usually did so between 6th and 7th periods. When my path through the hall crossed his, I was deeply uncomfortable with this and told him so, but he wouldn't stop. I took different routes to escape him. But the junior cheer captain and her posse made a point of tracking me down so he could find me elsewhere. Every time he did this, everyone in the area would treat it as a sweet, romantic gesture, despite my obvious discomfort. Wouldn't any girl be lucky to have a boy so devoted to her that he would give her a rose every day? He was still telling everyone I was his girlfriend. The final straw for me was when he walked into a class he wasn't in to find me and give me my daily rose. My teacher, who was friends with the junior cheer captain, let this happen. For weeks afterward, she would ask me about my date every day. When he came in, I told him to get out and leave me alone. His feelings were clearly hurt, and he left looking like a kicked puppy. My classmates started calling me a cold-hearted bitch. It didn't matter what I had to say about him. I was an ice queen, refusing this sweet boy's advances. Everyone in the school had decided that I was in love with him, and nobody cared what I had to say about it. My crush, who was part of the popular group, joined the junior cheer captain in pursuing me into returning my date's feelings. At every event where the cheerleaders were present, my date would push his way to the front of the crowd. He would go to great lengths to get my attention. At football games, he would have a flag in the student section so I'd look at him when we were cheering. The other girls would make comments on how endearing he was when he waited in the parking lot by our bus back to the school just to hug me and tell me how great I did. I didn't know what else to do other than let this happen. I had only recently ascended to a position of visibility. If I conflicted too hard with the cool kids who were so dead set on setting me up with this guy, I could be an outsider all over again. I hoped that if I just kept ranting to my real friends about how creepy he was and publicly let him do what he wanted, it would all blow over. My school had a 15-second attention span, so some scandal had to one-up me sooner or later. The truth emerged, as usual. In the locker room, it turns out the junior cheer captain had been telling him during their afternoons together that I was into him. He'd come to her for help, announcing his crush on me, and she had gone a step further and convinced him I felt the same, despite the fact that I didn't even know his name. She had lied to him for weeks prior to homecoming proposal, and when I told her that was wrong, she didn't care. She told me I should be grateful because everybody was starting to think that I was gay. My best friend, the lesbian who was starting a gay revolution and I inspired, spread a rumor that we were dating. After all, everybody already thought I was gay, right? But my date wasn't fazed. In fact, He told everyone that he'd just turned me straight again. Ew. 3 weeks after he asked me, it was finally homecoming night. Thanks to cheer obligations and a complete coincidence involving a switched backpack that left me without a dress, I ended up only attending the dance for half an hour. My date awkwardly stood on the side of the room while I danced my heart out to Mr. Brightside. I almost felt bad for him when, right at the end, the junior cheer captain appeared like a summoned demon to suggest we slow dance at the next opportunity. Thank God I escaped that one by walking to the DJ and suggesting he played Footloose. My date walked out to the parking lot to wait for my mom to pick me up while we waited for her to drive around, which took entirely too long because she still hoped I'd stopped making a fuss and dated him. He asked me out. I politely declined. He quickly stammered that we could go with a group of people, like the junior cheer captain and my crush. I denied him again and made it clear we were only friends, and I wasn't interested in romantic endeavors because I was too busy. That was actually true. I was in all advanced classes, varsity theater, and cheer, and worked part-time. A few days later, a teacher eloped to Vegas, and nobody cared about my love life anymore. My date and I were distanced again by classes and activities and work. It appeared that everything was going back to normal. That Friday at the football game, my crush asked me to sit with his shoulders for the almanator, kind of romantic thing at my school. Overjoyed, I accepted, and I hoped this was the beginning of a new chapter for me. I ignored the frantically waving flag in the stands. Monday, my date stood on a chair in a second period class and announced that everyone should be weary of my crush because he would steal your girl. I heard everyone buzzing about it a few hours later when someone called me a bitch again for breaking my date's heart. I knew I was being dramatic, but I decided not to go to lunch that day, terrified of running into him. I'm so glad I didn't. Later I saw on Snapchat that my date had carved my name into his arm with a pair of scissors. His bleeding arm was screenshotted and sent to me by half a dozen people, most of them demanding why I'd hurt him like this. He did it in the middle of lunch in a crowded cafeteria, and somehow no administrator noticed or cared. The school was buzzing. My date was a broken-hearted victim, and I was the evil, secretly gay bitch who wouldn't give him a chance. I got so many dirty looks. By fifth period, I was ready to just walk out, but my good girl instincts kicked in, and I decided to tough it out for 2 more hours. Around that time, I got a panicked text from one of my cheer friends. While she had initially been insistent that I date that creepy guy, she had apparently changed her mind after the lunch incident earlier. She told me that my date, who was in her 5th period class, was going off the rails when he started out saying that he wanted to kill himself because I wouldn't love him. This had escalated to saying he'd kill my crush for lying to me and stealing me away. Finally, he started talking about how he knew where I lived. My parents had given him my address when he initially wanted to ask me to the dance at my house, and he would make me pay for wronging him. I knew that after 6th period, our paths through the hall would cross. Since the beginning of this ordeal, the school had cracked down on students getting outside, and my alternate route to escape him was no longer an option. My class was at the far end of the hall with nowhere to go but into the central hub, and he would be coming from the other end of the hallway towards mine. I was stuck up at a chimney, basically. Desperate, I texted the junior cheer captain to finish what she had started and tell him that I was not and had never been interested in him. She made this mess, and I would make sure that she had cleaned it up. She said she'd go to the counselor, but she didn't know what else to do. This was way beyond her control now. For the first time, only, I skipped class. I hid out in the theater hall and waited for 7th period. I got a few texts during the passing period that my date was waiting for me by the bathrooms. There was a little alcove right there where you can't see people coming around the corner, and the thought of him hiding there and waiting for me to walk by my alone horrified me. Right before 7th period began, a few of my classmates burst in, cackling, and proclaimed that my date was coming down here after school to kill my crush. They thought this was hilarious. But judging by the look on my crush's face, this wasn't a joke to him anymore. Our teacher brushed this off as typical theater drama, pun fully intended. I watched the clock and tried not to cry, knowing that by the time the bell rang, my date would be outside, waiting for me and my crush to emerge. That day ended up being a work day, so my crush and I were able to escape the classroom and hide out elsewhere in a theater hall to get away from him. He opted for the black box theater, and I went for the lighting closet. Obviously, I didn't witness what happened, but my best friend filmed me, and afterwards, allegedly my date had turned up 3 minutes before the bell rang and stood outside the classroom where we couldn't see him. When we opened the door, he told everyone standing around that he was ready to have a knife fight with my crush. We don't know if he actually had a knife or not, but the idea that he might was enough to terrify me. His arm was wrapped in paper towels that he was bleeding through. My best friend told him my crush and I were gone, but he didn't believe her. He stood outside for 25 minutes until the administrators began walking through to make sure no one was in the school who shouldn't be. That night, I texted him that not only would I never date him, but could no longer even see a friendship between us. I sent him a number to a suicide hotline and told him to get help. Finally, I told him that he needed to learn what no meant, and I never wanted to speak to him again. He responded that he was sorry and asked if there was anything he could do to fix this. I told him no. I don't think he learned the meaning of the word after all, because the same pattern repeated itself a few months later on Valentine's Day, the next year at homecoming, senior year Valentine's Day, and prom. But those are other stories. I have since graduated, gone on to college hundreds of miles away from him. My family back home moved from the address my parents gave him. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not gay. My crush, on the other hand, came out a few months later, and we were friends for the rest of high school. I'm working on handling romantic endeavors in a healthy way. But he got in my head. He was the first person to ever show interest in me. Ironically, the last time I saw him was my first and only homecoming game after graduating. But this time, I had true friends to defend me when he predictably tried to pull some weird stuff with me. The worst part, looking back, was somehow being at fault for everything. To this day, people from my high school reference the whole ordeal as that time you wouldn't date that poor shy kid. I can't even appreciate red roses anymore. My ex-date didn't get the message after homecoming junior year and ended up pulling some seriously weird shit even until after we graduated. None of it was as epic as junior homecoming, but it definitely cast a shadow over the latter half of my high school experience. From here on out, due to his activities for the next 2 years, I'll be referring to him as my stalker. For the months after homecoming, things started to settle down again. I didn't have any classes with my stalker, but the only person I still had to deal with was the junior cheer captain. She would go out of her way to be nice to me, inviting me to parties and buying me coffee and giving me rides to games, basically bribing me to keep quiet about what a manipulative bitch she was. My stalker reappeared on Valentine's Day 2016. I was still a junior, but I had almost forgotten that homecoming even ever happened when, halfway through my day, he cornered me in the hallway and gave me a rose out of his teeth. I hoped that that would be the end of it, but I underestimated my classmates' appetite for drama during 7th period theater. We were in the library computer lab. After the rose thing, my crush from fall semester, who had since come out as gay, warned us that my stalker was carrying around a present for me in his backpack. I thanked him for the heads up and told my best friend. She and I were sitting together on the inside row when the bell rang. We stood up to leave, but the girl on the other side of me turned to face us, blocking us off from the exit. She was a close friend of the junior cheer captain's. She asked me what I was doing after school, and I knew that she must be trying to herd me towards my stalker so I could collect my presents. But I refused to go. I knew I needed to get out of that school as soon as possible before she just told my stalker to come meet me at the library instead of the theater hall. To get her out of my way, I said I'd go meet him after I went to the bathroom, and she moved out of the walkway. My best friend and I hid in the bathroom furthest from the theater hall. I knew he wouldn't leave until he delivered his gifts, and we had rehearsal that day, so I knew I'd have to go down there sooner or later. My best friend suggested she should go down and retrieve the presents for me, so he'd leave before I had to go to rehearsal. 2 more of my friends happened upon our bathroom crisis, and they decided to link up with my best friend on her mission. I waited in the bathroom while they went to intercept the gifts. 20 minutes later, they returned. Among the gifts were 3 boxes of my favorite candy, which I didn't really like anymore thanks to this whole mess. An expensive Doctor Who jewelry box and a full banquet of roses again. They told me, laughing uncomfortably, that there had been a whole group of people waiting for me to walk into the theater hall. My stalker wasn't too happy to hand over the presents, but my best friend made it clear I wouldn't be coming to get them, so he could hand them over to my friends or never deliver them at all. After about 10 minutes, the group waiting for me dissipated, and my stalker gave away the gifts. I was so creeped out that I didn't keep any of them, not even the jewelry box, which was TARDIS-shaped and actually kind of cool. For my birthday, a few weeks later, I got out of school after 4th period and went to a theme park with my cousin. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving or where I was going. My best friend told me my stalker had waited outside the theater hall for me with a letter and a rose in hand until the school kicked everyone out who wasn't in theater. I was assistant director and light crew for one act play that spring. An acquaintance of mine who didn't keep up with gossip was in charge of making the program, and she mentioned how cute my boyfriend was for taking out an ad in the program for me. I was sufficiently freaked out. I told her I didn't have a boyfriend and asked to see the ad he'd paid for. It was a picture of my stalker, and from junior homecoming, along with a note that said something like, "Good luck, Saucy, I love you." I begged my friend not to put it in the program, and she didn't, seeing my obvious discomfort. She refunded him his money and made some excuse about how local business buying more ad space. He tried the same trick for the last show of the year, which I was actually in. He showed up to the opening night and got kicked out for filming. The theater department has now instituted a widespread rule of checking with the person an ad is targeted at before printing it, which is more than any school administration could ever care to do. During a cleanup day for theater the summer before senior year, a guy from a different school showed up to help. He had been talking to me over social media for a few weeks, and I knew I was his next target. He'd made a game out of going on a date with every girl in our department. Sure enough, he asked me out while I cleaned up the prop closet, and I agreed. He was decent looking, and he wasn't mentally unstable, even if he was a fuckboy. I also knew that if I played my cards right, I could turn this to my advantage. He was using me, so I just made sure I could get something out of it, too. We went on our first date. It was okay, no weird advances or anything, and he bought me dinner. On the way home, I directed the conversations toward homecoming. He caught my drift and asked me right there. No muss, no fuss. I said yes. Senior year started. My new date was all the way over at his school on the other side of town. My stalker was in 2 of my classes, 4th period biology and 6th period English, and had the same lunch as me. I was hyper aware of him staring at me every day, but didn't want to make a big deal about it. I knew he wanted my attention, and I refused to give it to him. Instead, I went on about my life. I made friends with the teachers who were lunch hall monitors so I could leave the cafeteria, effectively avoiding my stalker. I ate lunch in the theater hall with my best friend every day. I asked my biology and my English teachers not to make me sit by him or work in groups with him, and they agreed. They, like pretty much everyone else, thought I was a dramatic cheerleader making up stories. I was a senior, and I really didn't want to deal with the bullshit of a crazy stalker anymore. Not that I ever wanted to in the first place. Homecoming was very early this year than last year. In English class, my stalker sat near 2 theater girls who usually walked to 7th period theater with me, and he turned around to ask them for ideas on how to ask me to homecoming. They were in the camp of classmates who were amused by my stalker's antics, so they wanted to rile him up and watch the fireworks. They also knew that the fuckboy I was talking to, because theater kids are the worst gossipers ever, and they gleefully told my stalker that I already had a date. He proceeded to attempt to bite his finger off in class, which went about as well as you might think. Obviously, he didn't succeed, but he did draw blood, and he terrified my 2 theater friends who had incited his instability. He stared at me the whole time, and I sat on the other side of the room and ignored him. I didn't care what he did. I refused to give him my attention, and I wouldn't be intimidated by him anymore. After class, my 2 friends came up to me and told me the details of what had just happened. Together, the 3 of us approached the English teacher. She believed me fully this time. He was moved into a different English class the next week. I didn't have to worry about him after 4th period because I skipped lunch every day. I was getting confident about my escape maneuvers. Then my usual hall monitor was gone, and I got stuck in the cafeteria. I had been out of lunch for so long that I had forgotten my stalker was in the same one until I accidentally made eye contact with him, staring at me from across the room like some kind of ghost. The second I saw him, he started speed walking across the room to my table. I ignored him, hoping he was just trying to psych me out, but it didn't work. He sat down in the seat next to mine. I was freaking out. I looked at the girl on the other side of me and begged her to get him out of here. She simply laughed at me. A year before, I would have kept quiet and dealt with my discomfort for fear of people hating me. But I was a year older and already contracting senioritis, so I stood up, grabbed my backpack, and stomped out of the lunchroom. The hall monitor stopped me, asking me where I was going and if I had a pass. I said I was going to talk to the crisis counselor, and he had to let me go, probably because he didn't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. I walked directly to the counselor's office, signed in, and found myself sitting in her office a few minutes later. I told her the whole story from the beginning. I had been to her office before, and she had shooed me away after saying I was being too dramatic. This time she didn't. Instead, she spent the greater half of the hour I was there asking why I hadn't come to her when all of this started. When I finally got her to address the actual problem, her first question reaffirmed my fears. She asked me after I told her about the self-harm and threats and general creepiness, what about him made me so opposed to dating him? I thought I was going to scream. I had a gut feeling that the truth wouldn't get me anywhere, and I needed action. I didn't care how I got it done, but I needed him out of my life and definitely out of my classes. So knowing full well her attachment to Jesus, I pulled the saving myself for Jesus card. I put all those Sundays being forced to go to church to good use, and it worked. She stopped asking me why I waited and why not just date him, and asked what would make me feel safer. I told her to get him out of my schedule, and she said she'd look into my options. Within a few days, I was called back to her office. She had gotten him placed in another lunch period, but biology was only offered fourth period, and both of us needed to graduate. I still considered this a victory. I only had to see him for 50 minutes every day. She told me to come talk to her whenever I needed someone to lean on. She would make sure my teachers understood. My stalker found new ways of seeing me. My friends didn't make the cast of Winter musical, but I did. I didn't realize that I had been isolated until my stalker joined a crew and regularly tried to intimidate me. He would drill holes in set pieces that didn't need work because I was sitting near them, and he wanted to watch me flinch. He would steal the props I used and hide them in the shop, so I had to be near him to retrieve them. My new crush and I were co-dance captains, and she convinced her friend, the set head, to keep my stalker off stage at all times. After the musical ended in spring, my new crush told me she had heard my stalker was getting angry about me playing hard to get. I was hanging out in the theater hall with a few crew kids getting ready for one-act play when one of them pointed at me, shocked, and went, "You're saucy." He told me he had seen pictures of my backyard. I was confused and weirded out. So he explained that my stalker had shown him pictures of my backyard and porch. I asked to see them, and he said he didn't have the pictures. He'd just been shown them by my stalker. I didn't really believe him, and he could tell. So he said, "You have a big bay window in your living room, a bunch of bikes on your back porch, and a big-ass rose bush." It was an accurate depiction. I don't know for sure how to explain that, but I have theorized that my stalker had at some point been in my backyard before we adopted our purebred Doberman. The dog had freaked out in the middle of the night a few times, but we brushed it off. Now I wasn't sure. My bedroom was in the front of the house. so I tried to reassure myself by thinking he hadn't seen me changing or anything super crazy, but it didn't really help. My best friend was disowned by her mother and stepdad, and within a weekend, she was shipped off to live with her biological father. I told myself I could survive the next 4 months and graduate, and then I'd never see my stalker again. As prom and graduation approached, I persuaded my parents that I only wanted one present, my best friend. They paid for her plane ticket both ways and flew her home to be with my date to prom. I kept her a secret so I could surprise our other friends when she showed up at prom to dance with us. My stalker only briefly entertained the thought of asking me to prom, which I later discovered was the now senior cheer captain's doing. I guess she'd finally started to realize the full effect of her actions, because she had told him he needed to leave me alone. I don't know what else she said, but he went eerily silent in the weeks leading up to prom. He still came to the last play of the year, but he didn't film me this time. He waited for me outside the auditorium afterwards, but I was with other people on our way to cast dinner, and he didn't try anything. At prom, my friends were elated when they saw my best friend had returned. We danced and talked shit and had a great time together. It was honestly one of the best moments of my life when they walked in and saw her. Of course, my stalker tried one last time to change my mind. My friends and I were sitting at one of the tables together, laughing and catching up, and I saw my best friend's expression turn to a glare when someone walked up behind me. I turned around to see my stalker waiting behind my chair. I stood up and said as calmly as possible that he wasn't welcome here. I was also 17 and pissed off and feeling unstoppable, so I tacked on, "If you ever speak to me again, I'll rip your dick off." It was the last thing I ever said to him. My best friend flew away again. We all graduated, and everyone went on our separate ways for college. I saw my stalker again at the first homecoming after I graduated high school, but he didn't talk to me. He just stared at me the whole game. Later, he showed up to my sister's fall play, and he asked a cast member where she was and if I was there. Lucky me, one of the cast members was one of my littles, and he told my stalker he needed to leave immediately. I guess this story has a happy ending. I got away in one piece with no foreseeable appearance of my stalker in the future. To my dad, I do in fact like boys. I just like girls too. But for the sake of the subreddit and my happiness, homecoming date from hell, worst set crew member ever, and bringer of teeth roses and junior mints, let's not meet again. So this happened around a year ago. I was living in a large city in the UK, around a mile from the center. Although the area I lived in was nice, the city itself had a lot of crime. A teenage girl actually got stabbed to death on her way to school on a bus near my flat not long ago. I had just finished my university class and was waiting at the bus stop, and I'm helping a woman locate her bus on the timetable, and as I'm helping her, my bus pulls up and drives away. Just great. A man must have seen the whole thing happen, because he comes over to me and says something along the lines of, "Tough luck, that's annoying." And I reply, "Yeah, typical," or something like that. Normal small talk, trying to be polite to him. Shortly after, the next bus comes along. I get on, and so does the man that I was just talking to, which I found weird as he could have gotten the earlier bus I missed. Whatever. I don't really think much of it, and I put my earphones in and continue on the 20-minute journey home. I get off the bus at a normal stop, and I'm walking along when suddenly I feel someone grab my shoulder. I flinch and instinctively push the hand away and look behind me. It's the man from before. I take my headphones out and he says, "Hey, beautiful, you got a man?" My defenses immediately go up, as I'm sure any girl living in a city will understand. I start walking and he follows me. Yeah, sorry. I'm pretty bewildered at this point. I have experienced creepers before, but not someone physically grabbing me. Nah, you're just saying that. I can tell you are lying. Come on, beautiful. Can I have your number? Me. No, I have a boyfriend. I actually wasn't lying. I did have a boyfriend. He continues asking over and over and over again, getting angrier and angrier at me. No, sorry. At this point, I start walking really fast, almost jogging. He's still following me. It's about a 5-minute walk to my flat, and he followed me the whole way back. I honestly think at this point I'm going to get attacked, stabbed, I don't know what. I have never been in this situation before, probably due to the fact I'm a 5'11" girl. Even though I only weigh 130 pounds, I have been told I look intimidating due to my height. So I get to my flat and he's followed me all the way to the doors. Luckily I get in and I shut the fucking door before he follows me and goes up to my flat. Around 30 minutes later, I go out to the balcony and look down and he's still there. Contemplate calling the police, but instead I call for the concierge and they go out and I can hear them threatening to call the police if he doesn't leave. Thankfully he does. I spent the rest of my months living there worried he was going to show up, and luckily he did not. My stomach turned recently when I heard on the news that not 5 minutes from where I used to live, and this all took place, a girl was walking home late at night and she got raped. She flagged a car down for help and got raped again by a different guy. I can't imagine the horror this poor girl went through. To any girls reading this, honestly, look into getting self-defense classes or something, especially if you live in a city. I'd really love to have karate chopped the guy in the dick, but seriously, I was lucky, and it could have ended a lot worse. I have no idea what this guy's intentions were. I don't know if he just wanted my number or if he had something more sinister in mind. Be wary with who you speak. I find with men harassing women in the street, if you completely ignore them, more often than not, they will stop. If they don't, or they are getting physical, a loud noise will startle them, so you can run away. Invest in a rape alarm. Also, don't feel like you have to answer a person who is talking to you just to be polite in a situation like this. You don't owe them politeness. Your safety is more important. This story extends from 8th grade middle school to my freshman year in college. I'm 24 years old now, so this must have began in 2008. I was raised in a Korean household with strong Christian beliefs. Every summer and winter, there would be a youth retreat where all of the teens in our church would go to one big joint retreat with counselors and teenagers from churches in and out of the state. I met my best friend, Hannah, there. She was from Philly and had a pastor who was white, who we called Pastor Allen. After these retreats, everyone would add each other on Facebook and keep in touch. I remember a day or two after the '08 summer retreat, Pastor Allen would often reach out and ask how my talk with God was going since the retreat. and if I ever need someone to speak to, I could always confide in him. This didn't alarm me at the time because counselors would keep in touch all the time. I always kept our conversations brief considering the fact I was shy and timid. Over the years, I had seen Pastor Allen at retreats and was friendly with him. Nothing strange happened, other than his persistence with keeping in touch with me on Facebook. After retreats, I slowly stopped talking to him, and eventually, we didn't speak at all. This is where it all starts to get weird. One day, after our summer retreat in 2011, I got a friend request from a woman named Sumiko. I noticed we had a lot of mutual friends from the retreat, so I assumed she was a counselor there. She messaged me immediately after I accepted the request. Her and I became quickly acquainted. At the time, I was 15, and she was everything I needed in an older sister. Although we never met, I let my naivety get the best of me and confided in her about my teenage girl troubles. After months in, I remember walking into church and asking one of my youth leaders if they had met her at the retreat. He said he had never heard of her. I asked him if he could go check the roster, and he did, only to find out there was no Sumiko on the list. That's when things started to get super eerie for me. I panicked and went home to block Sumiko off of my Facebook. I saw on her page that the only person who continued to tell her it was nice seeing her was Pastor Allen. No one else from the retreat seemed to really be interacting with her. It all started to freak me out. I blocked her and unfriended Pastor Allen. I remember no longer attending these church retreats. A few days later, I received an email telling me that Sumiko decided to attempt suicide because of me, and that the email was coming from the mental hospital she was staying at. They told me it was all my fault. I was a junior in high school under high amounts of stress from SATs, and I deleted the email because I just wanted to forget about it all and focus on studying. Shortly after, I started to receive really unfriendly anonymous messages on my Tumblr. They would tell me that I was going to burn in hell for eternity if I continued to stray from God. They continued all the way into my senior year in high school. I always deleted and ignored them, or I'd reply sarcastically and laugh at them with my friends. Eventually, the messages faded and I didn't hear much from them anymore. In 2012, I got accepted to a close-by Christian college and moved into my dorm. My dorm floor decided to have a little icebreaker meeting to help us get comfortable. I met another Korean girl and began talking about our similarities in our childhood being raised Korean with Christian parents. I opened up to her about the encounter with Pastor Allen, and midway through the story, I saw her face slowly dropping and getting pale. She told me she had a very similar encounter with a pastor she knew, and that he was also a white man working with the youth in an all-Korean church. I asked her where she was from, and she replied with the same state that Pastor Allen was from. She then asked me if the name of the pastor was Pastor Allen. We had the same predator in our lives at the same age. I'm not sure where Pastor Allen is now, but I pray to God that he has not harmed any little Korean girls. It's absolutely disgusting. He was borderline 60 years old when I was 14 or 15. It makes me sick knowing people prey on children in the most vulnerable ways. It ruined a lot about my perspective on Christianity as well. It's horrible to take something so spiritual and take advantage of a child with it. So Pastor Allen, with a creepy young Asian girl fetish, Let's never ever meet again.